Wine. It's simply crushed and fermented grapes. It's the variations and the stories that make it so fascinating. Even within a single region, you find differences in soils, climate, weather, elevations, all of which impact the grape, making it taste different when it finally arrives in your glass. This beverage has the ability to tell you the story of a year in the place that it calls home. And perhaps even more important than any of this are the stories of the wineries, the journeys of the winemakers and the people who love these wines, their philosophies, and the different ways they bring their reverence to the grape. In this series, we explore different wine regions from around the globe. We want to give you a feel for the place and the region. Our goal is to inspire you to take the scenic route. Late last summer, when Oregon was in its heat wave, we were in the Willamette Valley and spent a morning at Youngberg Hill with owner and winemaker Wayne Bailey. His vineyard is located in the McMinnville AVA, a sub-appellation in Oregon's Willamette Valley. Until the Lower Long Tom AVA was approved, this was the most western AVA in the Willamette Valley. The AVA sits just west of the charming town of McMinnville, in rain shadow of the Coast Range Mountains. This rain shadow means that they get considerably less rainfall than many of the regions around them. Many of the vineyards are on south-facing slopes, which allow them to take in the cool winds of the Duzer Corridor from the Pacific. Here they get great diurnal shifts, that's the day to nighttime temperature shifts, which means slower ripening and good acidity, as well as wind to keep the grapes dry and healthy. Established in 2005, the AVA covers over 39,000 acres, with just 749 acres planted to vineyards. The vineyards roll down the foothills with elevations as high as 1,000 feet, rolling down to 200 feet. There are a total of 9 wineries currently in the McMinnville AVA, but many more sourcing grapes from the region. As we sat on the deck surrounding the inn at Youngberg Hill, I asked Wayne what brought him to this place.
I grew up on a farm in Iowa, growing corn and raising pigs, just like everybody else. And I got an engineering degree in an undergraduate, and that took me into corporate America, where I spent 15 years, and ultimately ended up in Chicago in the consulting business, utilizing my engineering degree, but I also got a MBA at University of Chicago, and parlayed both of those into consulting. So I was consulting in Chicago, and primarily in the food and beverage industry, and more primarily into in wine and beer. And that took me to Burgundy. I got a consulting contract to go over there and work with the domain. And when I went over there, I was pleasantly surprised that the Vineyards over there consider themselves first and foremost farmers. And that was a pleasant surprise, because having grown up on California wines, and it's all about the celebrity winemaker and making wine and the winery and everything, blah, blah, blah. It was really refreshing to have them say, no, the vineyard and farming is what wine is all about. And then, of course, that resonated with me, having grown up on the farm and being a farm boy. So when I got done with my consulting gig there, I decided to stay. And I lived there for 2 years and worked hands-on in the vineyard and in the winery, learning how to grow wine grapes and make Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. It's also where my epiphany with Chardonnay took place, and where my love for Pinot Noir really evolved as well. So I came away from that experience, never thinking I would, but I came away from that experience saying, you know what, I think that's what I want to do. I want to get back to being a farmer, and what better thing to farm than wine grapes? And as I often say, wine is a lot better than grain alcohol, and more fun to make. So that then, when I came back from there, which was in '93, that began the process then to look at moving in this direction and doing what we're doing. I knew I wanted to grow Pinot and Chardonnay, I knew I wanted to do it in a cool climate. The Willamette Valley was a no-brainer. I mean, it wasn't even a decision as to looking anywhere else. So coming out here then, as we talked about, I wanted to kind of hedge my bet, if you will, against global warming and everything. So I knew I wanted to be as close to the ocean as I could and as high in altitude as I could get. And so I immediately started looking into the McMinnville AVA, which was closest to the ocean, and higher properties. And this one happened to have 2 blocks that were already planted, okay, in 1989. And so there was some experience with the fruit and the hill, the diversity in altitude, the diversity in soils, all those things added up to make this a very attractive property for us. And so, long story short, 2003, the owners let us know they were interested in selling, and here we are.
Wayne took us on a tour of the vineyard and explained his sustainable practices. He began farming organically, then moved into biodynamics, and is now working towards no-till practices.
I've always said that if there's one thing that I want you to remember when you leave this hill, it's that wine is an agricultural product. And so that's what everything I say is going to reinforce that. And the other thing that I always say is that wine is made in the vineyard, not in the winery. So that's our whole philosophy on everything here, and the focus on the attention of the vineyard. And because of our sustainable practices, it's really focusing not just on the fruit and not just on the vine, but it's a focus on the whole environment. And more in particular, over the last few years, it's really been focused on the soil. Because that's the foundation. And if you don't have healthy soil, you can't have healthy plants, and ergo everything else. So, we want to make sure that the soil is healthy as can be. So it started out no synthetics. Then the biodynamic farming, which enriches the soil. It's those things you can do. And now the no-till farming has been really, we started doing that in 2016, 2017, and really starting to show the impacts of that. It's a little tougher this year with the dryness and the heat and things, but there's 2 key things that I'm seeing, and we're still seeing results of it. But one is the ability for the plants to be somewhat self-regulating. Yeah. They're kind of like, oh, if you quit disturbing us, we can take care of ourselves, kind of thing. Yeah. And so, which kind of goes along the lines of, if your farming is by nature impactful on nature, okay? Right. So minimizing that as much as we can allows nature to do what it does best. Right. And so no-till really falls in with that really well. Yeah. So that's the one thing I found, is that the vines have really become a little bit monitoring in terms of the amount of vegetation they grow, their health, and all those things that you look for to produce, great fruit. And ergo, the second thing is consistently we've had a little bit less yield, but the fruit has been really, really good quality, and very, very balanced going into the winery. So.
That seems to make such sense. The grapes have so much that they have to keep track of as far as weather, right? As far as what the weather is changing. And then also suddenly, if you're tilling and you're doing a lot in the vineyard with all that intervention, they're always like, wait, is somebody going to do this? Because,
it's almost shock. Every time you hit them, there's a shock there.
And it's another curveball that you've thrown at this plant that was trying to figure out its environment and its atmosphere.
So they're watering over there. You know, we wouldn't normally do that.
Right.
But these are
babies.
young vines. They were planted in fall of 2018. This is the new block of Pinot Noir.
Okay.
It's a field mix of Dijon 115 and 667.
Okay.
So as I say, it just adds a couple of more crayons to my coloring box when it comes to making the wine. This, we call this Wayne's World.
I love that.
On the right, the vines we've been going through is the Aspen block, named after my youngest daughter, Aspen. Was planted in 2006, and in 2014 we grafted half of it over, the top half over to Chardonnay.
Wonderful.
So it's a mix of that. The Pinot Gris is 2 clones, 49 and 52 Dijon.
When we visited in late summer of 2021, Oregon was in a heat wave. Wayne explained how this was affecting the vines.
So yeah, the other thing I'll just point out is this year is very unusual in that because we stopped getting rain in March, you know, the vines were depleting subsoil moisture starting in April.
Right.
Where normally they wouldn't be doing that till June. And so there's a lot of variability. And this is a good example of that. These vines, same age as the Pinot Gris, now this is starting in the Chardonnay,
Okay.
same age of vines, but subsoil moisture is depleted a lot here. And these vines really have not had the canopy. And that's the biggest thing I've noticed is there's a lot of canopy variation this year as a result of that lack of subsoil moisture. And then, of course, the concern, the thing that I'm looking at right now is how close these vines are to shutting down.
Right.
And not being able to push fruit to full maturity, and determining whether I need to cut some of that fruit off or not.
Right.
This is one of our riparian areas. There's a dam up there, and would be a pond if it hadn't dried up.
Right.
But we try to keep 2 or 3 areas that are really natural habitat. So you get a great diversity of plant life, and then homes for diversity of insect life. And we've got one here and one over on the other side for that purpose. And then we also have our resident honeybees. Obviously, the vines don't need the honeybees,
Right.
but all of your other plants
Do. Exactly.
And so we've got 3 hives currently, and Nicolette takes care of those, and she makes honey, and we sell organic honey in the tasting room that's from our own hives. So
That's great.
Let's speak first about altitude. As you increase in altitude, the temperature drops. Wayne tells us that the Jordan block, that sits at the highest point of his vineyard at 700 to 800 feet, averages 2 degrees cooler than the Natasha block at 660 feet just down the hill. The higher altitudes, in addition to being cooler, also have a larger diurnal shift. That is the difference between the daytime and nighttime temperatures. There are other differences. Higher altitude vineyards tend to have less fog and are windier. Altitude also means more intense sunlight. So what do all those things mean to the grape? Wind, as well as the heat from the intense sunlight and the cool of the nights, all cause the grape to thicken its skin. The skin is where much of the flavor in wine comes from. This gives you a wine with more flavor, aromatics, and body. Often, high-altitude vineyards are on a slope. You can see this with this vineyard going from 660 feet to 800 feet just between these 2 blocks. A slope means water will run down, so the vines are in well-drained soil. This is important for grapevines, which hate wet feet. The vines in these soils reach deep with their roots to find water below and pull in minerals, which give the wine a sense of place. That diurnal shift that we spoke of, with the intense sun in the day and cool nights, also factors into ripening and acidity. The warm days, tempered by cool nights, allow the grapes to ripen more slowly and more fully. This phenolic ripeness is the ripeness in the skins and the seeds. When the grapes are ripe, they have less green vegetal notes, and when this ripening happens slowly, they retain the acidity in the wine. Warmer climate wines tend to be richer and fuller, but with less acid, which sometimes can make them seem flat or flabby. Global warming is affecting wine country, with established vineyards seeing temperature increases. Finding higher altitude sites is a way to keep this at bay. We spoke about well-drained soils and their importance to the wine grapes. Let's dip into a bit of geology. Soils are defined by the size of their particles. You have gravel, which has bigger chunks of rock, and sand, which are smaller particles. Both of these don't hold water very well. It mostly drains through them. Then we move on to silt and clay. Silt is finer than sand, and clay is finer still. Clay particles pack in tightly together and hold water in. Think of a terracotta pot. These different soils retain water differently, which affects the roots and therefore the grapes. Grapes grown in clay tend to be bigger with higher tannins and deeper in color. In sand, wines are more aromatic and lower in tannins due to thinner skins, which also means lighter color. In addition, the color of the soil can affect the vine. Light soils will reflect the sun from the ground back up to the vine. Darker soils retain the heat, like pavement in the summer, and keep the vine warmer at night. Soil also contains minerals. Here in the Youngberg Hill vineyard, the top of the vineyard has soils of volcanic basalt, while the lower portion is marine sediment. These kind of differences in soil can come from erosion. Remember, water runs downhill and often takes soil with it. It can also come from deposits. In this case, the marine sedimentary soil comes from when the area was covered by ocean, which gradually drained away. This soil is decomposed sandstone. Is there a difference? Marine sediment, especially in Pinot Noir, creates wines that are bold with darker fruit and notes of black pepper in the wine. The volcanic basalt soils tend to have bright fruit, spice, and minerality. These wines often age well.
Natasha block is predominantly marine sediment,
Okay.
but when you get up in this area, we're at about 600 feet now, and the soil gets shallower and rockier. So these vines obviously have less access to subsoil moisture than
Right.
those vines do,
Yeah.
even though they're on basically the same soil. So.
Right.
And same age of vines, same clones, everything.
Wow.
So this is kind of a good perspective right here because
great,
you get, first of all, a really good perspective of the Natasha block. The Natasha block, again, is broken into three sections. You've got the north section up there, which I use pretty much every year now for rosé. And then the south section, which all goes into the Natasha bottling. And then the west section here, which is usually where I pull the selections that I want for the Bailey family wine, and then the rest of that goes into the Natasha. So I always process them all separately just because there's little nuances, some vintages more so than others, but there's always things that I'm looking for that are different in the three sections and different growing conditions. This, the Natasha block kind of meanders around between 575 and 625 feet. So you get a very little variability here. As you can see, it's a block that until you get up to the north end is protected by the trees and everything, and don't get as much of that cool sea breeze as, say, the Bailey and the Jordan blocks do.
Gotcha. Does that affect your ripening and the intensity of the wines?
It does.
Do these get more heat then?
Yeah.
Here.
On average, the Jordan block, which is the one I compare it to because it's the same age vines, same clones, everything else, the Jordan block will always be 2 degrees cooler than the Natasha. And how that translates into the wine is that while they bud break at about the same time, I always harvest the Natasha block a week to 10 days earlier than the Jordan. The Jordan's always the last stuff I pick. So then again, this is the Bailey block. This is the Jordan. So again, 32-year-old vines, owned through Clamart and Batesville. So same as the Natasha, only this is on volcanic rock soil. And of course, we're at about 700 feet here,
Right.
and up at the tree level, we're almost 800.
Wow.
So, and this really came from my experience in Burgundy. Is I love to show the Natasha and the Jordan wines side by side, and really let that story of terroir tell itself.
Yeah.
Because you're dealing with exactly the same age of vines, exactly the same field mix of clones. Everything's the same except where the fruit's grown on the hill.
Right.
Now,
Oh, wow.
and this really gives you a lot better perspective
Yeah,
of when
it
we talk
does.
about difference in altitude and everything. How you can't notice it when you're down there, but when you're up here, you can really see the difference.
Indeed.
We headed down to the tasting room to sit and talk over some wine. Wayne poured the Natasha and the Jordan so we could do a side-by-side. Tasting and smelling the difference between these two wines, which grow so close together, was fascinating. These two wines are treated in the same way in the winery, and the only difference is the soil and altitude, and what a difference that can make. The Natasha is plush with dark fruits. The Jordan has a bit more acidity from the basalt soils and is a bit leaner. Both are expressive and delicious, but in different ways.
Okay, so tell me about the
So,
two wines we
so
have here.
again, the Natasha and
Natasha
the Jordan, and this is a fun side by side because both blocks are 32-year-old vines. Both blocks on a field mix of Pommard and Wadensville clones. Both blocks, while they were picked at a different time, all the other farming and everything was the same. Winemaking, barrel selection, everything was the same. So the difference between the two is strictly where the fruit was grown on the hill. Natasha at 600 feet, Jordan at 800 feet. Natasha on marine sediment, Jordan on basalt.
Gotcha.
And as I learned in Burgundy, it's all about, for me as a winemaker, it's not about trying to make a wine taste a certain way or have a different
Right.
perspective or character. It's allowing the wine to express what the fruit was like coming out of the vineyard.
It's kind of that snapshot of the vineyard and the vintage.
Exactly. Yeah, both where the fruit was grown and what environment it was grown in.
Exactly. It is amazing how different the noses are.
Yeah. And people will ask sometimes, well, why do you do that, or why do other folks not do that? And I said, well, for me, primarily, it's the fact that not only do I love it personally myself, but I'm small enough that I don't have to make a wine that matches the flavor profile of 75% of the population.
Exactly.
I make the wines that truly reflect the fruit grown on the hill. You know, somebody else making 100,000 or 200,000 cases, they got to have a little bit broader perspective in that regard. And I understand that, but that's not what I'm here for.
We did a pairing with the 2016 Natasha and the 2017 Cuvée Pinot Noirs. For a side, we went earthier, but kept the rainbow theme with a rainbow root vegetable gratin. This was made with red and yellow beets, sweet potato, and parsnip, baked in cream, thyme, garlic, and Gruyere cheese. I settled on rainbow trout, a fish that I felt would stand up to the Pinot Noirs. We baked the fish whole with herbs and lemon. The rainbow trout stood up to both wines, even the Natasha, which I found to be rich and brooding. The earthiness of the root vegetable gratin and the depth of flavor added by the Gruyere was a beautiful pairing with these Pinots. Wayne is determined to leave the vineyard better than when he found it. Organic, biodynamic, and no-till are a means to this. It's more than just a vineyard. The property is an ecosystem.
Everything that I try to do on the farm is almost antithesis to how they're growing corn in Iowa today. Okay, it's it's industrial chemical farming of corn in Iowa, and I just see how it is just totally decimated the land and the soil. It's dead, and I'm just one of the things that when we moved out here and took over the property that I was one of my goals, other than to produce great fruit, was to leave this vineyard and leave this property healthier when I leave it than it was when I bought it, and for it to get better and improve it. So I don't look at anything in isolation in terms of, well, I want to get the vines healthier, I want to make higher quality wine and everything. It's how am I going to make the environment healthier? How am I going to improve the soil and make sure that it's better tomorrow than it is today? Looking at all of those things. And if you do all of those things right, then the rest will come. So that was the mindset for organic farming. But I always say organic farming tells you what you can't do, but it doesn't tell you anything about what you can do. And that's then when evolution into biodynamics, which then says, okay, here's the things that may, not necessarily always will, or do you have to take I don't take a prescriptive approach to biodynamics. I take more of a pragmatic approach. So I don't spray all 9 preparations every year. I only spray those that the environment, the vines, the soil are telling me that I should. I'm always prepared to if I need to. I've got all the tea formulas and everything, and I can do that. But I only do it if it tells me to, as opposed to me thinking I know better and I should be doing whatever it tells me to do. So that took us into biodynamics, and then there was a professor up at Washington University who's done a lot of studying in this, and I read one of his books back in 2014 or 2015 on no-till. And boy, that resonated with me because he did studies all over the world, but it was really the ones that he did in the Midwest and really articulated very finely what I experienced in farming in the Midwest and corn farming in particular, where you looked at a field of corn, and then on the end, by the fence line where you turn around, of course there's no fences anymore, the land would be 2 feet higher than the farm, what you were farming. And that's because of erosion. No-till, it's because of tilling, and then as a result of that, erosion. So 2 feet of that, and it just continuing on, and so I go, well, that makes total sense. And then the whole other aspect is that when you have a whole another environment underneath the soil, the biomass and the bioorganisms and everything that's there, and built around that the structure of the wine roots and the grapefruits. And so you don't want to disturb that. and you don't want to disturb everything else. You don't want to dig up. So that was part of the no-till. The other one, which I did some experiments back in 2012, 2013, was all around plowing under cover crops. And there used to be a mindset, there still is a lot of the mindset out there, that, well, when it's drying, certainly if you're not irrigating, and you want to take away that competition for moisture. The grass is no competition for the vines and moisture. They're not even at the same level. And we also found out that if you plow everything under, now the ground has no shade. It has no protection. So you're actually drying out the subsoil moisture faster than if you left the cover crop. So that was the impetus behind no-till.
The Youngberg Hill tasting room is at the inn on the property. This bed and breakfast boasts 9 suites, some with in-room fireplaces and air jet tubs to allow you a little luxury. This is the perfect place to stay while you explore wine country. They also host weddings and private events at the inn and the event center, in addition to winery events like their summer concert series and Mimosa Sundays.
Tell us a bit about the events and the inn and how that all came about. The whole hospitality end of it, because we've been talking agriculture. That's the down and dirty stuff, but then hospitality here.
Well, first of all, the inn, this building and the inn was built back in 1988, 89 by the previous owners. And they were here for that. That was their thing. And so when we were looking at buying property, particularly I considered, I wasn't buying this for the inn. I'm going on. And Nicolette's like, but it's here. It's already there. We need the income. Let's keep it going. I said, okay, it's your bag. You do that. And so that began the hospitality aspect of it. But then, after a while, we found that 90% of the guests that were staying here were here because they were exploring Willamette Valley wine country. And so then we realized we had kind of an ingrown market, if you will, which had a lot of synergies to it and worked out well. And then as we started to do that, then Nicolette started to talk about doing other events. And it started out to do a wine event here and there and everything. And then she goes, well, let's do some other stuff. And part of that was driven by the fact that unlike a lot of vineyards and wineries out there where, is a retired doctor or somebody that made, like Domaine Serene, where he made millions in pharmaceuticals and had that money to spend and everything. We didn't. We put all of our money into buying the property, and we didn't have other jobs. We didn't have other income. This was it. And also what I learned way back when I was growing up on a farm in Iowa and ever since is that farming is never a profitable business. It has great highs and it has great lows, and overall the long term you break even. And that the as my dad always said, you're always land rich and cash poor. And that seems to be the case with farming in general. So, other than being able to make the wine and being able to make money on the wine itself, not just on growing the grapes, but we were looking for other ways to make income. And that's where Nicolette really jumped in with the hospitality side and doing weddings and things like that to help supplement so that we could, in fact, plant more grapes, so we could make more wine and do the things we really wanted to do from a vineyard and winery standpoint.
That's great. It's kind of a hand-in-hand thing.
Yeah.
And you're wonderful with hospitality, too, so it's really
We have great people.
Visit their website at youngberghill.com. They're open currently for walk-in tastings from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. daily. But do check their website for updates. They also have additional tasting experiences that require reservations. To learn more about the Bailey family wines and the Bailey Society, visit their website at baileyfamilywines.com.
Your destination is on the right.
A short drive from the Willamette Valley, you will find the spectacular Columbia Gorge. The western end of the gorge is lush and green with multiple waterfalls along the Columbia River Highway. Just a 30-mile drive west of the airport in Portland, you get off of Highway 84 and onto Route 30, the historic Columbia River Highway. This 30-mile stretch is often called the Waterfall Corridor. This is the perfect place to recharge your battery and soak in the calming effects of nature. This beautiful scenery does more than just soothe the soul. It is also the scenic route that takes us to our next location, Walla Walla, Washington. In Walla Walla, we visit Caprio Cellars, where hospitality is first and foremost. We speak with owner Dennis Murphy about what brought him to the region for wine. Join us next time on The Scenic Route.